The Galactic Artifact Classification Bureau operated on 17 levels of bureaucratic tedium, each more soul-crushing than the last. Well, assuming one possessed a soul, several member species were still debating that particular philosophical quandary at Subcommittee Level 9. The Bureau existed primarily to catalog, categorize, and catastrophically overthink every piece of ancient junk that surfaced from forgotten corners of the galaxy. It was, in the estimation of anyone with functional brain matter, the universe's most elaborate filing system wearing the costume of scientific importance. The Bureau's classification system ranked discoveries by complexity, origin, and potential danger. Priority Omega meant mildly interesting rock. Priority Beta indicated possibly useful technology from a known extinct civilization. Priority Alpha meant stop whatever you're doing and pay attention because reality just hiccuped. Alpha-One had never been used. The designation existed purely as a theoretical construct, the bureaucratic equivalent of a nuclear option that everyone agreed should remain a dusty contingency in the manual. Its criteria were absurdly specific. Technology demonstrably beyond current galactic capabilities, unknown origin signature, and immediate strategic implications. In 8,000 years of galactic cataloging, nothing had qualified. Until a humid afternoon on excavation site 774, when a Havoxian archaeology team unearthed something that made their compound eyes twitch in synchronized confusion. The device measured roughly 20 centimeters in diameter, constructed from a metallic composite that their scanners identified as yes, just yes, no chemical breakdown, no molecular structure analysis, no helpful data whatsoever. The sensors simply confirmed the object existed and then presumably went off to question their programming. Its design resembled what primitive cultures might call a compass, with a circular housing and a needle suspended in perpetual motion, though the needle pointed neither north nor to any gravitational center. It pointed, with uncomfortable insistence, toward a specific coordinate in deep space that corresponded to absolutely nothing on any star chart. The surface bore etchings, geometric patterns interwoven with what appeared to be mathematical formulae from at least 6 different computational languages, 3 of which predated current galactic civilization. At the device's center, stamped with the kind of casual permanence that suggested someone had done it without thinking twice, was a biosignature, a human biosignature. The lead archaeologist, a Havoxian named Earthen who possessed 4 doctoral degrees in the patience of continental drift, stared at the readout as though it had personally insulted his ancestry. Humans had joined the galactic community approximately 140 years ago, emerging from their little blue planet with all the grace of a toddler discovering stairs. They were enthusiastic, certainly, loud, absolute, technologically sophisticated by their own standards, which were adorable. But this device operated on principles that made current cutting-edge technology look like particularly clever rocks banged together. The energy signature alone suggested power systems that shouldn't be possible without destabilizing local space-time. The metallurgical composition implied manufacturing techniques that the galaxy's finest engineers would sacrifice appendages to understand, and it had a human signature stamped on it like a property tag. Earthen initiated the standard protocol for anomalous discoveries, which involved approximately 60 forms and a sacrifice of 3 hours to paperwork. The device was transported under armed guard to the nearest bureau facility, where senior analyst Fentang, a gaseous intelligence who communicated through color shifts and aggressive sighing, conducted the primary assessment. The assessment took 4 minutes. Fenton's color spectrum ran through confusion purple, disbelief orange, and settled on alarmed crimson before he activated the emergency classification protocol. Within an hour, the Bureau's Central Command was conducting an emergency session, which was remarkable because getting galactic bureaucrats to agree on emergency usually required at least 3 subcommittee meetings and a catered lunch. The device sat on an examination platform, its needle spinning with mechanical serenity while 24 of the galaxy's finest minds tried to reconcile the impossible data. "Signature is definitely human," announced Fentang, his gaseous form rippling with exasperation. "Genetic markers match the Earth-originating population. Female, approximately 30 cycles old by human standards. The biolock suggests she personally calibrated this device." "That's impossible," stated a Vrelian counselor, his crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that suggested deep skepticism. Humans have barely achieved stable quantum drives. This technology operates on dimensional folding principles we've only theorized. Perhaps it's a coincidence, offered another analyst, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it even as the words formed. Similar genetic markers could. The signature includes a personal designation code. Fenton interrupted, shifting to exasperated yellow. Human alphabetic characters spelling out what translates to property of Dr. Amelia Frost, Deep Space Exploration Initiative, don't touch. Silence descended like a judgmental blanket. The needle continued its rotation, pointing toward coordinates that terrestrial maps didn't recognize, toward a region of space that surveys had classified as empty void. The compass shouldn't exist. The technology shouldn't be possible. And the signature certainly shouldn't belong to a human from a species that still considered breaking light speed a recent achievement worthy of celebration and commemorative beverages. The bureau director, a Havaxian elder, whose career spanned 6 centuries of determined catalog maintenance, made the declaration that would initiate the largest investigation in modern galactic history. His voice carried the weight of someone who realized his comfortable retirement plans had just exploded spectacularly. Classification: Alpha-One. Origin: deep space. Initiate full trace protocol on the biosignature. And someone get me the human diplomatic liaison. He paused, mandibles clicking with grim resignation. I suspect we're about to discover something profoundly inconvenient about our newest neighbors. The Deep Space Tracking Division occupied a station that orbited nothing in particular. Positioned in interstellar space specifically because tracking required freedom from gravitational interference and an unhealthy tolerance for isolation. The facility housed 200 analysts who had voluntarily exiled themselves to the galactic equivalent of a sensory deprivation tank, and they took pride in their ability to trace anything across impossible distance. They were very good at their jobs, which made the current situation professionally offensive. The human biosignature shouldn't have left a trail. Biological markers degraded, dispersed, became cosmic background noise within decades at most. This signature blazed across their sensors like someone had carved a highway through space-time and hung directional signs every few light years. The trail stretched backward through regions that surveys had marked as sterile void, through sectors classified as gravitationally unstable, through zones where nothing should survive long enough to leave evidence. The trail was approximately 9,000 years old. Analyst Wen, a Drellian whose species experienced time slightly non-linearly, which made him exceptionally qualified for temporal tracking and absolutely unbearable at parties, compiled the preliminary report with mounting disbelief. Humans had achieved rudimentary spaceflight roughly 400 years ago by their own historical records. Before that, they had been confined to their planet, progressing through predictable stages of technological development that every species followed: stone tools, agriculture, industrialization, nuclear fission, and finally the jump to interstellar capability. Except this trail suggested humans had been conducting deep space operations when most current galactic civilizations were still developing written language. The situation became significantly worse when the tracking team identified waypoint markers. The signature wasn't random drift. It followed a deliberate path marked by technological beacons that broadcast on frequencies the galactic community had only discovered 800 years ago. Each beacon was inactive but intact, constructed from the same impossible materials as the compass, and each bore human maintenance logs written in casual shorthand that suggested routine operation. Beacon 74 requires power cell replacement, read one log, translated from human English. Scheduled maintenance delayed due to personnel shortage. Will address next quarterly sweep. Note: local asteroid field poses navigation hazard. Recommend route adjustment for civilian traffic. 9,000 years ago, in regions that current surveys classified as uninhabitable, the galactic community had maintained comprehensive historical records for approximately 12,000 years. Ever since the founding species had established the first interstellar communications network, those records documented every known civilization's development, from initial technological awakening through integration into galactic society. Humans appeared in those records exactly 140 years ago, when their first faster-than-light vessel had stumbled into a border patrol and nearly triggered a diplomatic incident, by broadcasting friendship messages on a frequency reserved for waste disposal scheduling. They had been charming in their ignorance, enthusiastic, eager to learn. They had absorbed galactic technology with impressive speed, adapted their infrastructure, joined trade networks, and generally behaved like every other emerging species. Grateful for the opportunity, slightly overwhelmed and completely honest about their limitations. Apparently that honesty had been selective. The tracking team followed the trail deeper into uncharted space, their vessel equipped with sensors that could detect quantum fluctuations from 1,000 light-years away. The coordinates the compass indicated led to a region designated as Empty Sector 41, notable primarily for its complete lack of anything interesting. No stars, no planets, no resources, no reason for anyone to visit. Except when they arrived, Empty Sector 41 turned out to be significantly less empty than advertised. The structure measured approximately 4 kilometers in diameter, constructed in a rotating wheel design that predated modern station architecture by several thousand years. It hung in the void like a forgotten monument, its hull scarred by micrometeorite impacts and cosmic radiation, but fundamentally intact. Power signatures indicated dormant systems maintaining minimal life support. Docking ports stood ready to receive vessels designed according to specifications that hadn't been used since humanity's supposed pre-spaceflight era. The station's identification beacon activated as they approached, broadcasting a cheerful automated message in perfect human English. Welcome to Waystation 17, Deep Space Exploration Initiative. Please transmit clearance codes and prepare for standard decontamination protocol. Coffee is available in the commissary. Please excuse our dust, we're currently operating on skeleton crew. The message had been recorded 9,000 years ago. The coffee was presumably no longer available. When authorized a boarding team, though every instinct screamed that they had stumbled into something that would fundamentally recalibrate galactic history, the station's interior confirmed those instincts with aggressive enthusiasm. Human writing covered the walls. Maintenance schedules, crew rosters, navigation charts, mapping routes through sectors that wouldn't be officially discovered for millennia. Personal quarters contained belongings left behind by occupants who apparently intended to return family photographs, entertainment devices, clothing sized for human proportion. The station's central computer remained functional, maintained by backup systems that drew power from sources the boarding team couldn't identify. Its logs documented routine operations, supply runs, personnel rotations, scientific surveys, and the mundane bureaucratic tedium of maintaining a deep space outpost. The entries ended abruptly 9,000 years ago, with a final message logged by someone identifying as Station Commander Amelia Frost. Recall order received. All personnel to return to core stations for emergency consolidation. Waystation 17, entering hibernation mode pending future reactivation. Systems configured for remote restart. Compass units distributed according to protocol. We'll be back when things stabilize. Frost out. They hadn't come back. The station had waited 9,000 years for a crew that never returned, faithfully maintaining itself in the empty dark, preserving evidence of a human presence that predated recorded galactic history. The tracking team found 47 more stations along the trail, each one a perfect time capsule of impossible human achievement, each one raising questions that made comfortable historical narratives disintegrate into confused fragments.
The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, which required dragging representatives from their various commitments with promises that yes, this actually mattered, and no, it couldn't wait for the scheduled quarterly meeting. The council chambers occupied a station designed specifically for diplomatic grandstanding, with seating arranged in concentric circles that allowed everyone to feel important while accomplishing minimal actual work. Today, however, the usual political theater had been replaced by something approaching genuine concern. The evidence floated in holographic displays around the chamber's center: station schematics, maintenance logs, technological specifications, and one particularly damning compass that continued pointing toward coordinates it shouldn't know existed. 47 ancient human outposts scattered across supposedly empty space, each one a middle finger to established historical consensus. The human diplomatic representative sat in the newcomer section, a designation that suddenly felt hilariously inappropriate,
with the expression of someone who had been dragged from bed at an unreasonable hour, to explain why their species had apparently been lying through collective teeth for over a century. Ambassador Dane Holloway possessed the weathered features of someone who had spent years managing interstellar relations, and the current situation had aged him approximately another decade in the past 48 hours. The Galactic Council chair, Administrator Vexith, opened proceedings with the diplomatic equivalent of controlled fury. His mandibles clicked in rhythms that suggested he was reconsidering every positive opinion he had ever held about humanity. Ambassador Holloway, perhaps you could explain how your species, which joined our community claiming to be recent spacefaring novices, somehow established a space infrastructure 9,000 years before your official historical records indicate you invented the wheel. Holloway had the decency to look uncomfortable, though whether from genuine embarrassment or political calculation remained unclear. He stood, adjusted his formal diplomatic coat, and delivered his response with the careful precision of someone navigating a conversational minefield. The situation is complex. The situation is that you lied, interrupted Avrelian counselor, her crystalline form refracting light in aggressive patterns. Your species presented yourselves as inexperienced newcomers requiring guidance and protection under developmental species protocol. Those protocols granted you favorable trade terms, technological sharing agreements, and territorial concessions based on the understanding that you were genuinely emerging into the galactic community. We didn't lie, Holloway replied, though his tone suggested he was splitting hairs thin enough to qualify as quantum phenomena. We accurately reported our current technological capabilities and recent achievements in faster-than-light travel. We simply didn't volunteer our complete historical record. Didn't volunteer, repeated Fenton, his gaseous form cycling through colors that suggested he was considering violence despite lacking appendages to commit it with. You omitted 9,000 years of spacefaring civilization. That's not a casual oversight, that's strategic deception. Holloway sighed, and for a moment, the diplomatic mask cracked enough to reveal genuine exhaustion underneath. He gestured toward the holographic displays, toward the evidence that humanity had apparently scattered across the galaxy like embarrassing childhood photographs. What exactly would you have done if we had arrived and announced that we used to operate stations throughout your territory thousands of years before your civilizations achieved spaceflight? That human outposts predated most of your historical record, that we had mapped and explored regions you still consider frontier space? The council chamber fell silent. It was a valid point, which made it significantly more irritating. You would have assumed we were claiming territorial rights, Holloway continued, warming to his argument with the enthusiasm of someone who had clearly rehearsed this explanation. You would have demanded we justify our absence, explain why we abandoned advanced technology, prove we weren't planning some elaborate return to reclaim former holdings. The political nightmare would have consumed decades of negotiation before we could establish basic trade relations. So you chose to pretend you were primitive newcomers, stated Vexith, his tone suggesting this explanation had not improved his mood. To accept charity and concessions meant for genuinely developing species. We chose to avoid unnecessary complications, Holloway corrected. We didn't claim resources we couldn't access. Didn't demand recognition for achievements our ancestors accomplished millennia ago, and didn't burden interstellar relations with historical baggage that had no practical relevance to current reality. A Drellian counselor leaned forward, her temporal perception apparently catching details others missed. What happened? Species don't simply abandon functioning deep space infrastructure and regress to planetary confinement. Your stations indicate advanced civilization, then nothing. 9,000 years of silence before you suddenly reappear claiming to be novices. Holloway's expression shifted into something approaching genuine regret. He pulled up additional data, flooding the holographic displays with information that the Council's intelligence services had presumably spent weeks trying to extract. The records painted an uncomfortable picture. Humanity's first space age had been ambitious, expansive, and catastrophically unsustainable. They had spread across the galaxy with the enthusiastic ignorance of people who assumed infinite resources and infinite time. Outposts had stretched supply lines beyond breaking point. Political fragmentation had turned unified exploration into competing factions. Resource depletion had made maintaining distant stations economically impossible. The collapse had been spectacular. Outposts had been abandoned as humanity retreated toward their core systems. Then those systems had fallen to internal conflicts, and eventually the surviving population had consolidated back to their origin planet. The retreat had taken approximately 2,000 years, each generation losing more technology, more knowledge, more connection to their spacefaring heritage. By the time humanity stabilized, their ancient achievements had become mythology, then legend, then forgotten entirely. We rebuilt from nearly nothing, Holloway explained, his voice carrying the weight of inherited guilt. Took us 7,000 years to claw our way back to spaceflight. When we finally achieved faster-than-light capability and encountered your civilization, we faced a choice. Explain our embarrassing history of catastrophic overreach and civilizational collapse, or simply present ourselves as we actually were, a species genuinely new to modern interstellar community, regardless of what our ancestors had accomplished. And the station asked Vexith. The compass? The technology scattered across our territory. Failsafes, Holloway admitted. Our ancestors knew they were abandoning infrastructure. They left recall systems, homing devices, technological seeds in case future generations ever returned to space. The compass was designed to activate when handled by human biosigns, to point the way back to what we had lost. He paused, looking around the chamber at representatives, whose species had built their civilizations in the shadow of abandoned human outposts, without ever knowing it. We didn't expect it to work after 9,000 years. We certainly didn't expect anyone to find it before we were ready to have this conversation. The council sat in collective silence, processing the revelation that the galaxy's newest members were actually its oldest ghosts, returned from a self-inflicted apocalypse, with the good sense to keep their mouths shut about their embarrassing past. The silence in the council chambers possessed weight, the kind that accumulated when comfortable assumptions collapsed, and everyone simultaneously realized they needed to recalculate their entire understanding of galactic politics. Holloway stood in the center of the attention like a man waiting for execution, though whether his own species would execute him for revealing too much, or the council would execute him for revealing too little, remained an open question. Administrator Vexith clicked his mandibles in a pattern that suggested he was mentally reviewing every human trade agreement, territorial concession, and diplomatic favor granted over the past century through a significantly less charitable lens. The humans had played the role of grateful newcomers, with Oscar-worthy performance, while sitting on 9,000 years of technical documentation and infrastructure, scattered across sovereign space like buried treasure. Except the treasure was apparently activated. The update arrived via priority transmission, interrupting the council's collective processing, with the digital equivalent of an air horn. A Havexian monitoring station reported that Waystation 17 had emerged from hibernation mode approximately 6 hours ago. Its power systems had engaged, navigation beacons had activated, and automated systems were conducting diagnostic checks, with the cheerful efficiency of technology that had been waiting millennia for someone to push the start button. Then Waystation 18 activated, then 20, then 41. Fenton's gaseous form cycled through colors, so rapidly he appeared to be having a chromatic seizure. Ambassador, what exactly is happening? Holloway's expression suggested he was asking himself the same question with significantly more profanity. He accessed his personal communication device with the urgency of someone who suspected his day was about to deteriorate further, which was impressive considering its current state. The compass, he said slowly, piecing together implications in real time. It wasn't just a homing device, it was a master activation key. The words landed like diplomatic grenades. Around the chamber, representatives began accessing their own intelligence networks, pulling reports from monitoring stations across their territory. The pattern emerged with uncomfortable clarity. Every location where ancient human outposts had been identified was now reporting system activation. Dormant stations were waking up, running initialization sequences, and broadcasting identification signals that announced human presence in approximately 200 locations across supposedly well-mapped space. You didn't know this would happen, stated Vexith, though his tone suggested he was desperately hoping for confirmation rather than stating established facts. We knew the compass was a recall system, Holloway admitted, his diplomatic composure cracking under the pressure of galactic infrastructure, spontaneously remembering humanity's forgotten empire.
We didn't know it was network. We didn't know touching it would trigger cascade activation across every dormant installation. We definitely didn't know there were 200 installations, because our own records listed maybe 50. Avrelian counselor gestured sharply, her crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that suggested impending legal action. Your ancient outposts are activating inside our territory. Some are positioned in strategic locations near trade routes, resource deposits, and military installations. This appears suspiciously like preparation for territorial reclamation, or, offered a Drellian representative, whose temporal perception apparently let him see patterns others missed. It looks like someone's automated systems are following 9,000-year-old programming, without regard for current political boundaries because they were never properly shut down. He wasn't wrong, which made the situation marginally less suspicious, and significantly more absurd. Humanity's ancestors had apparently built their infrastructure so robustly that it could survive millennia of neglect and still respond to activation protocols like an enthusiastic dog greeting an owner who had stepped out for groceries 9,000 years ago. The real problem emerged when the stations began communicating with each other. The network architecture humanity's first space age had employed operated on principles that made current galactic communications look like children playing with string and cup. Quantum entangled nodes, dimensional folding transmission, and protocols that bypassed conventional space-time limitations entirely. The stations had been isolated for millennia, but now they were reconnecting, sharing status reports, and apparently conducting democratic elections to determine which installation would serve as primary coordination hub. Waystation 3 won by simple majority, probably because it occupied the geographic center of the network and had maintained the best power reserves. It immediately began broadcasting an automated message across every frequency humanity had ever used, including several that the galactic community had appropriated for their own purposes over the intervening millennia. "Attention Deep Space Exploration Initiative personnel," announced the message in cheerful human English, translated simultaneously into 47 galactic languages. "Network reactivation complete. All stations reporting nominal status. Awaiting command authorization and personnel check-in. Current elapsed time since last personnel contact, 9,174 years. Please update operational parameters at earliest convenience. Coffee is ready in all commissary facility." The message repeated every 60 seconds, broadcasting across the galaxy like the universe's most patient and passive-aggressive reminder that humanity had left the metaphorical stove on for 9 millennia. Holloway looked like he wanted the floor to open and consume him, which was reason, considering he was watching his species' carefully maintained cover story disintegrate, while automated systems cheerfully announced to everyone within radio range that humans had been here first and would someone please update the operational parameters, because the computer was getting concerned about the personnel check-in delay. "Can you shut it down?" demanded Vexith, his mandibles clicking in rhythms that suggested his patience had exhausted itself. "Approximately 3 revelations ago. I don't have the authorization codes," Holloway admitted. "Those would have died with the last Deep Space Exploration Initiative commanders 9,000 years ago. The systems are following protocol, waiting for human command personnel to provide updated instructions." "Then get command personnel," suggested Fenting with exasperated crimson intensity. "Get your government, your military, anyone with the technical knowledge to tell these enthusiastic relics to cease broadcasting humanity's ancient territorial claims across our space." Holloway made several calls that involved increasingly frantic conversations with Earth-based authorities, who apparently shared his sentiment that ancient automated systems should not be conducting independent diplomatic relations. The solution, when it finally arrived, possessed the elegant simplicity of someone giving up on doing things properly and just hitting the emergency override. A human military vessel arrived at Waystation 3 carrying command personnel who possessed the bureaucratic authority, if not the historical legitimacy, to claim succession from the long-dead Deep Space Exploration Initiative. They transmitted updated operational parameters that boiled down to "Everyone is dead. The Empire collapsed. Please stop announcing our presence. And for the love of everything holy, stop offering coffee to alien monitoring stations." The network accepted the update with the same cheerful efficiency it had shown in reactivating. Stations returned to low-power standby mode, beacons reduced to minimal identification signals, and the broadcast ceased. The galaxy's infrastructure settled back into comfortable operation, now with the added knowledge that approximately 200 pieces of human archaeological real estate were scattered throughout supposedly sovereign territory. The Council reconvened after the crisis had been downgraded from immediate existential threat to massive political headache requiring decades of territorial negotiation. Vexith looked at Holloway with the expression of someone reconsidering every positive interaction they had ever shared. "So," he said slowly, mandibles clicking with grim resignation, "humanity returns to the galactic community as innocent newcomers, accepts developmental assistance, establishes favorable trade relations, and then accidentally triggers ancient infrastructure that reminds everyone you were conducting deep space operations before most of us invented writing." "We really didn't plan this," Holloway offered weakly. "No," agreed Vexith, "which somehow makes it worse." He gestured at the data still floating in holographic displays. 200 stations, 9,000 years of abandoned infrastructure, and one enthusiastic compass that had decided after millennia of patience that now was an excellent time to remind the galaxy that humans had been here before and had simply forgotten to mention it. "Welcome back to Space, Ambassador. Try not to activate any more ancient empires during your tenure." Holloway nodded with the exhaustion of someone who had just survived a diplomatic apocalypse, and suspected the paperwork was going to be legendary. Behind him, displayed on the monitors that tracked the now dormant network, Waystation 3's identification beacon pulsed with patient regularity. The old guard had indeed returned home. They just hadn't realized they had left so much of it behind, waiting with automated patience for someone to eventually ask the right questions, and accidentally push the cosmic power button. The compass sat in its examination case, needle finally still, its purposeful stamped on its surface. Dr. Amelia Frost's signature remained clearly visible, a 9,000-year-old property tag that had just rewritten galactic history by refusing to stay long. Somewhere in the bureaucratic offices of the Artifact Classification Bureau, an analyst was updating the file on Priority Alpha-One discoveries, adding detailed notes about why the designation existed, and why it should perhaps include a warning label about activating ancient human infrastructure. The galaxy spun onward, slightly more complicated than it had been yesterday, considerably more aware that newcomer was a relative term when dealing with species who had a habit of forgetting they had already been there,